Doctors and nurses of Reddit, what is the dumbest cause of injury you've ever seen? When I was in high school, the class clown had a big pool party at his house and decided to show off to everyone that he could jump from the roof of his garage into his pool. Keep in mind, that would have been an impressive jump, even for an adult in good shape, while this kid was a scrawny 15-year-old who was slightly intoxicated. No one thought he would actually do it, especially when his sister started screaming at him to get his ass down before she got their mom. The laughing quickly died when he hit the ground and started screaming. He had broken his arm in 2 places when he landed on it. The doctor said he was actually pretty lucky it didn't hurt anything internal when he hit. He did have a long talk with him about how hard it will be to impress anyone if you're dead though. This is secondhand from a friend who used to be a nurse in the Royal Navy. Apparently a sailor managed to impale his scrotum with a hockey stick while playing deck hockey on an RN vessel when it was docked in Portsmouth. Apparently one of his nuts was the size of a honeydew melon and had gone black. This caused quite a stir and all the staff came round to have a good gawk under the pretense of viewing a rare injury. I believe he was okay in the end. Not a doctor or a nurse, but I was an emergency medical responder for a remote oil and gas site. Workers would go up there for a month at a time, and while they were there, all they really did was work and sleep, with a couple hours downtime at best. Just so many things stuck up asses. Some guy slipped in the shower and ended up with a soy sauce bottle, you know the type, with a short, fat base and a long slender neck, up his butt. Oof, been there. I had rolled my ankle by stepping in a hole while running on sand. A week or two later I was sitting in the living room and I heard a kitten meowing outside, so naturally I jumped up to go see it. My parents have a sunken living room and the step up is made of brick. I slipped on the brick step, which resulted in my ankle being rolled the other direction from the previous injury and slicing open the bottom of my foot. I still dragged myself outside to pet the kitten. The kicker is that my parents had guests over for dinner and were probably mortified that their teenage daughter was essentially zombie crawling across the deck to see a stray cat. A little backstory. I was in 9th grade and had rolled my ankle for the first time while playing soccer in low Converse shoes. Never play soccer on a concrete basketball court with Converse shoes. I remember the crack my foot made when I landed wrong. Anyways, the dumb part came later when I rolled my ankle again 2 weeks later in front of my house while getting out of the car. I wasn't paying attention to the sidewalk and missed the edge of it, slightly causing me to roll my ankle again. I still walked to my teacher's house nearby because my mom, also a teacher at my school, needed to take some paperwork to her. When we got back I put on my ankle brace and laid on my bed contemplating my walking style. One of the doctors my mom worked with almost got kicked out of his residency program because of a question he asked a patient. Guy came in with a dildo stuck in his rectum and the doctor asked him, "Do you want us to take it out or change the batteries?" The patient thought that was the funniest damn thing he'd heard, but one of the nurses had an issue with it and reported him requesting he be dismissed from the program. They didn't do that and told him it was because the patient found it to be funny that saved him. They also told the nurse to lighten up since the patient found it funny. A nurse here, we had a girl come in and who knows what she was doing, but she had one of the thin glow sticks in her bladder. Maybe some fun finger/glow play during a concert? I don't know, but pretty wild. Also, I had a Spanish speaking only gentleman explain why a shoe polish bottle was in his anus. We had to use a video interpreter due to the language barrier, but it was pretty wild to hear the interpreter say I have a bottle of polish in my anus, after expecting him to just explain why he had belly pain. We also proceeded to print out multiple pictures of common types of shoe polish. He used to ask him if it was this one or that one. It was hilarious when he identified what one it was based on the picture. He had to go to the OR. We had a prisoner come in because he decided to put a plastic butter knife in his urethra in order to get out of the prison. It broke and he needed surgery. Another prisoner, who had been recently rearrested for assaulting a relative after previously serving 20+ years for murder, decided he just wasn't going to use the bathroom at all and came in with some damaged kidneys and such. He did it because he intended to escape from the hospital, not considering that he would be literally chained to the bed. For some reason one of the guards let him use the bathroom in his room and he tried getting away through the ceiling tiles. That was super fun. A nerd doctor lived across the street from me growing up. The worst story he told was a woman who got an infection of some kind of crustacean parasite in her vagina. A really bad one that ultimately killed her in the hospital. She would take a lobster while sitting in the tub, insert the tail and stab it in the head. It would spasm and make the tail flip repeatedly, giving her pleasure. There was some kind of parasite that lived in the hinges of the lobster's tail that infected her. Ugh, it still haunts me. Guy was huffing a can of compressed air duster and passed out. He landed on top of the can and was out for some time. Well, those cans get pretty cold, so he ended up with some pretty bad frostbite on his arm. He had been huffing out in his driveway, so someone spotted him passed out and called the ambulance. We had no idea what was going on with him or why he had frostbite in the middle of summer. His buddy called looking for him as we were getting him settled in. He clued me into his friend's huffing habit. So I walked into his room and without saying a word I pulled 3 cans of dust off he had hidden in his pants. My dad is a doctor. One of the many fucked up stories he tells is from his residency. A woman presented to the ER with a chief complaint of a vine growing out of it. What? Yes, you read that correctly. This woman had a plant growing out of her vagina. Turns out she put a potato in her vagina to use as a diaphragm, a form of contraception. She apparently was told this would work to prevent pregnancy, but left the potato in there long enough for it to grow a vine. The smell of that potato must have been putrid. I mean, homegirl basically turned her vagina into a greenhouse. Not a doctor/nurse, but the cause of a dumb injury was cutting stuff on my table saw. Turns out I didn't have the guide square to the blade. Made my cut, shut saw off. Saw grabs a cut piece and pulls it back through the saw that was spinning down. Saw finishes spinning down by getting stopped by my finger. Tell my wife I'm going to the hospital cause I think I cut my finger with the saw. She asks me how I could think and not know, so I say it could have been the jagged wood. So I go in with the tip of my finger almost cut off. Trig nurse asks what happened. I explain. She asks if I'm allergic to anything, and I immediately reply table saws. Had the entirety of the ER laughing at me, either for my comment or my brilliance at stopping the saw with my finger. I'm not a nurse or anything, but I have gotten hurt many times and had to go to the ER many times. So one day I was chilling in my back room with some family and friends. We have a pull-out couch. That's important, remember that. So I folded the bed with the sheets and everything on it, so my cousins and friends would have more space doing stuff. I can't remember what we were doing. After like 10 minutes everyone had left the room but me. That's also important. I was sitting on the couch on the bed part. It was stuck because of the sheets, so I was sitting on the top of the folded bit. The slash mark this is an example slash. My foot was on one side of the couch and the couch fell on my foot. My foot was stuck between the metal bed frame and the hard couch base. I couldn't stand up, so my knee was by my head. I was not going to get my foot out. So I tried screaming, because nobody was in the room. Well, I can't scream, so I started yelling till someone heard me. I told them to get help as I somehow got my foot unstuck. I was taken to the ER and had sprained my ankle, but when they asked what happened I just said I got stuck in a pull-out couch. Moral of the story, don't trust the couch. Working as an X-ray tech in a local ER. 2 in the morning, 16-year females with parents are placed in one of our close trauma rooms. This was around 2005 when X-rays were still plain films that had to be hung on light boards. Our MD ordered a stat pelvis for possible foreign bodies. Sure enough, there is a small mag light that has gotten itself kind of stuck. Parents brought her in due to the concern of a burning sensation. Light must have been turning off and on with movement. I hang the films up on the light board in the trauma room and the MD walks in. Parents are beside the young lady. Doc looks at the films, turns to the girl and says, well, I can do one of 2 things. I can remove the light or change the batteries. You could hear the girl turn red. I used to be a security guard at a hospital and saw some stupid shit. had one guy come in with a concussion because he and some buddies decided that it would be funny to stack up a bunch of bricks into a loose wall and try to pull a Kool-Aid man. From what the guy's friend told me, after they found pallets of bricks on a construction site, they thought it would be a clever idea to stack him as they could and plow through it. He ran into it, full sprint. Not only did he split his forehead open because he ran face first into a 7-foot tall loosely built wall of bricks that weighs a lot more than he did, the bricks came down on top of him and caused a lot of abrasions. Not a doctor, but I had a really embarrassing situation. I fractured my ankle freshman year in Pet. Sounds cool, right? Wrong. I was playing soccer and the ball went out of bounds. As I was throwing the ball back in, I rolled my ankle to the point it dislocated. My mom always told me to walk off a sprain, so I stepped down, and the minute I did it popped in place and fractured. My classmates thought I was faking the screaming. I went to school the next day high from the arc with a cast and crutches. One of my friends is an emergency doc, and she told me about a dude who came in with his penis stuck inside a shampoo bottle. They had an extra hard time cutting him out of it. He'd waited so long to get help that a ton of blood had pooled in his penis. The moral of this story, and lots of others in this thread, is to buy real sex toys rather than improvising with household objects. I do not work in an ed, but I had a patient who had a stage collapse on him. I don't know how this happened. He was at a very famous place. You would assume it was solid state, and the ceiling fell on him. Guy was a stagehand. People screwed up the rigging, and bad things happened. Nice patient, though. He was in horrible pain, and just worked through it, and I got him up and running. He was one of my first patients. I ran up a set of hardwood stairs in socks, slipped, jamming my toes into the stairizer, broke 3 toes, and ripped the ligaments from the other 2 with a sliver of bone. No treatment except ice. I was like 30 years old. Also dropped a waterlogged railroad tie that probably weighed several hundred pounds about 6 feet onto the bridge of my foot. Couldn't walk on it for 3 weeks and it still hurts 30 years later, especially in ski and snowboard boots. Medical assistant here. We had a patient who tied his scooter to the back of a Jeep by using a rope. The handlebars ended up detaching and flying off, resulting in what I assumed was a pretty epic crash. He lost a couple teeth, had road rash, and a bad enough break that his arm needed plates and screws to piece the bones together again. It was hard not laughing in his face when we asked how he was injured. Got to take it at face value, but a man came in bleeding all over the shot himself with a shotgun, took out his entire right kidney and half his liver. He said he was leaning over and was cleaning his shotgun. He wouldn't go to the police because he didn't legally own the shotgun. That night we sent him off to a level 1 trauma center. He's lucky he didn't actually bleed out whole getting to our hospital. We were doing a bag every 20 minutes in the ambulance. I'm not a nurse or a doc, but an edtech. My favorite was the guy screwing around with his gun. He was practicing quick draws from the back of his pants. He shot himself through the ass. The dumb/funny part wasn't that guy, but it was his buddy that came in behind him, shot through the foot. The first guy shot the second guy in an accident. They looked like frat buddies greeting each other in the lobby, haha. I went to nursing school a few years ago, and my instructor told us this story about how a guy shoved a potato up his ass, was too embarrassed to go to the emergency room, so he just left it. Ended up getting infected, and by the time he decided to go to the half of his ass had necrosis, was dead from the inside out. She said it was by far the worst smell she could ever smell. For me, it's typically young men who insert objects too far up their rectum and then lose their grip on those objects and can't pull them out. That is why commercial but plug toys typically have flanges at one end which prevents the object from disappearing beyond the sphincter. Young men who can't get access to commercial adult toys often use carrots. You can imagine how serious this is, as it will block defecation. It is also a very embarrassing emergency to explain to the parents, and not an ideal way for a young man to have to come out the closet. My cousin was a super horny teenager and gay as fuck. I remember when I was like 12 and he was 17, he prolapsed his rectum using his mum's 10-inch dildo. I don't really know the details aside from that, and it's not been mentioned since. When he went to the hospital, we told our old relatives, great uncles and aunts and etc. that he had a rectal abscess, because if they found out he was gay they'd try and strangle him with their bare hands. Obligatory, not a doctor or nurse, just support staff, but the one that immediately comes to mind was the guy that practically got his hand degloved because he wrapped a horse's lead rope around it. One would think it's probably not wise to tie an animal that weighs 1,000 pounds onto something that's attached to you. I'm afraid I don't know all the details that occurred between the tie-up and the guy being hauled into my ear, but I guess you can call it the rope burn to end all rope burns. I had a patient come in with lacerations to her fingers. Her blender got clogged and she stuck her hand inside to clear it. She cleared it and the blender resumed unblending. Luckily, she had long acrylic nails. This helped lessen the impact. Guy came in after being concerned the bedsheet had stuck to his lower leg. Turns out he'd been using a petrol mower the evening before and it had exploded. Full thickness burn to his calf. No pain. He wanted to go home to feed his cows instead of being transferred to burns and plastics. Man, it looked like white leather. That reminds me of a story our carpentry teacher told us in 4th grade. I don't know if it's true or not, but apparently some kids a couple of years earlier had put super strong glue on one of the kid's molars and glued his jaw shut. They ended up having to saw/drill the teeth apart with dentist tools and the kid ended up losing multiple molars because of the resulting damage. It might just have been a made up story to keep us from messing around though. I was in the ER as a patient next to a guy who was brought in via ambulance because he superglued his eyelids shut. He was high as a kite, but so was I from the pain meds I'd been given for my own injury. Whatever meds I was given made me think everything was hilarious. I got yelled at by the nurses for laughing hysterically in the next room. He was being a pain in the ass, was on diversion already, and they were not amused. Not a doctor, but freshman year of college, my friends and I went sledding in the dark. My boyfriend at the time and I were sharing my sled, and it got stuck on a tree root and threw us off into the snow. While we were trying to get the sled off the root, BF said, "Oh, guys, it's a little breezy back there." He had been violated by the tree and was bleeding out the butt. I went to the ER with him and couldn't stop laughing as the poor nurse examined his taint. I felt like a horrible person. Not a doctor or a nurse, but I was an emergency medical responder for a remote oil and gas site. Workers would go up there for a month at a time, and while they were there, all they really did was work and sleep, with a couple hours downtime at best. Just so many things stuck up asses. Some guy slipped in the shower and ended up with a soy sauce bottle, you know the type, with a short, fat base and a long slender neck, up his butt. This is secondhand from a friend who used to be a nurse in the Royal Navy. Apparently a sailor managed to impale his scrotum with a hockey stick while playing deck hockey on an RN vessel when it was docked in Portsmouth. Apparently one of his nuts was the size of a honeydew melon and had gone black. This caused quite a stir and all the staff came round to have a good gawk under the pretense of "viewing a rare injury." I believe he was okay in the end. Operating theater. This woman came in with a frozen chicken stuck inside her vagina. Apparently she had a habit of buying them, inserting them and then pulling them out, as she really had a thing for going through childbirth, but on this occasion, she hadn't allowed time for it to defrost properly adequately. A few stand out. Person somehow swallowed a spiked dog toy. Someone tried to reverse his circumcision by cutting more of his dick off with a pair of scissors. Guy who stabbed himself in the dick multiple times. About every object known to man up the bum. If you like it then you shoulder put a string on it. I had a young man come into the ER one evening with a sex toy lost in his ass from the previous night. Turns out he didn't have any more sick days at work and spent the day framing a house with a dildo wearing away in his sphincter. He came to the hospital right after work. He was really glad when the batteries died somewhere around lunchtime. Had a university student who ignited a firework in his anus while drunk for the amusement of his buddies. It exploded, causing full thickness burns of his rectum and injured his external sphincter, resulting in him needing a colostomy.